this question is asked, reiterated, and considered in your duration of the 4-year program. What is this program and what does it mean to you? When I, Tessa Stangl, am asked what Civitas is, I like to think of it fondly. Something I've grown to love and simultaneously despise in my high school career. In my first year of Civitas, I was also privileged to be in the final year of the program coordinator, Ms. Linda Reed's final Honors English 1 class. In this class, we studied and discussed some of the world's most celebrated works, from those of Voltaire, Eugene Ionesco, and my personal favorite, Dante Alighieri's The Divine Comedy. And as we analyzed the poem, I thought that the circles of hell were very closely related to the circles of Civitas that we go through. I've also noticed in my 4 years here at Rio that whenever I mention my association with the Civitas program, I get comments that usually come off as, sounds like hell. And while that might be the image to the outside, only those who have walked these circles know the truth, and its graduates know why we subject ourselves to this kind of hell. The year before, the first circle of hell is limbo. The first circle of hell, but considered the outskirts because its inhabitants are only there for no real crimes committed but not being baptized. Here, the Civitas hopeful must go through an application process, including receiving a letter of recommendation. In my 8th grade year, I had heard of Civitas through my sister's friend, who herself attended Mariloma. But it was the Civitas program that actually swayed me to attend Rio instead of following in my sister's footsteps. I filled out my application and received my letter of recommendation for my 8th grade honors history teacher at Arden Middle School. The next step closer to the rings of hell was the interview and essay portion of my application. The day of my interview was so clear in my head that I could tell you everything I was wearing right down to my light blue seersucker Converse that confidently carried me into that office. My interview was in the room just across B8, which is now a room I recognize as my AP United States History classroom and my AP Government classroom. I was asked a series of questions about why I was interested in the program, if I knew the commitment I was about to make, and even questions about the election that had just passed. My essay prompt also pertained to the election as well, asking if there were any negative campaigning or mudslinging that affected this go-round. The other form of hell I went through was waiting for my acceptance letter that came only a few short weeks later. Little did I know the other circles I was to endure. Freshman year, or the 2nd and 3rd year, or circles of hell, are lust and gluttony. You've been accepted to Rio Americano's Civitas Academy. Now what? Your first class is Intro to Political Science. I was in a freshman class of 65 of us, which meant 2 teachers had to teach us separately, but collaborated on large projects and presentations. As we transitioned into the groove of high school, we also learned the ways of Civitas. Several assignments given at once, as was overwhelming for some, but most of us coped and stuck through it, even though the draw of blowing off assignments or reading requirements was very tempting, as lust was for those in this realm. The next step further into this world was the congresses, the large class-wide debates centered on controversial topics that pitted each student against their peer. These topics included prison reform, universal health care, and the economic disparity. I can recall a discussion in class where such a fire and passion ignited my argument, it all spilled over in my time to speak, and my screamed words rang in my classmates' ears. And then came our midterms and finals, our first in high school and in the program, where we were given a topic and covering it through September to January. I reported on the economic downturn of the late 2000s for both presentations, as the topics of presidential candidates, overseas affairs, and other national issues were covered. We immersed ourselves in the second semester, state and local government, and were foolish enough to think we had the hang of things. This semester meant learning all the counties that comprised California and where they were, exploring each branch of state government and their connection to public welfare, and a field trip to the state capitol and courthouse for hands-on and in-depth learning. But this excess of knowledge we ate right up, like the gluttonous students we were, was expected to be regurgitated and not just wasted away. Sophomore year, or the fourth and fifth circles of hell, are greed and anger. On and into the second year, the class downsized a bit. Some stragglers began to drop like flies as the pressure and heat from the circles of hell intensified. Miss Seibel, our instructor, almost immediately assigned our first speaking assignment in the class of speech. It was a commemorative speech in which I was randomly selected to speak first among my classmates and was very ecstatic to do so. Upon the day of our first speech, I was shaking. I had rehearsed this speech to my mirror, my parents, and even my older sister over Skype for the last 3 days, and the thought of forgetting a single word made my stomach churn. I rose and began to speak in front of my peers, and all my fears faded away as I spoke each word with confidence and excitement. I finished my speech and received much praise from my class as we congratulated and critiqued each student after each speech. It was so different seeing my classmates speak in such a formal tone, a complete 180 that I had seen the year before in the congresses. It was exciting to watch our peers enhance their skills of public speaking right before our eyes. The rest of the semester also consisted of 4 more speeches. An informative speech in which I taught the class about Amtrak's origins, a persuasive speech in which I argued that school uniforms and public education institutes were very wrong, and 2 impromptu speeches. These spontaneous speeches, which only called for 2 minutes of preparation and 5 minutes of actual speaking, were probably the most terrifying to the class. The requirement was to draw a slip of paper with either a quote, question, or statement in which we needed to argue against or in favor of. We were given 2 minutes to prepare and 5 minutes to speak. But we quickly acclimated to this challenge, and we found ourselves wanting to do it more and more. Offering to speak again and again, a desire to showcase our skills made us very greedy. And with our next semester, the International Relations course brought us worldwide knowledge. This class was dedicated to the business of the United Nations and foreign policy, including a mock UN, which met our final and midterm presentations, in which I represented the country of Japan. Through a series of article presentations and reports, we learned of foreign affairs on nearly all 7 continents. And I presented myself on the various terrorist groups around the world and the Palestine-Israel feud. All this information came together for the most intensive and competitive event in our Civitas career, Super Quiz. Super Quiz was a knowledge-based contention where teams of 6 put together their knowledge on the topic studied and matched up for the ultimate prize, which was an A+. The anger that exuded from the fierce game tested the bonds we had created with our peers and was strong enough to put us all through the 5th circle of hell. Throughout the first 2 years of the program, the Civitas students are required to complete 100 hours of community service. This is essential to the program and its purpose of creating civic-minded students. When we went out to bake for the local bounty dinner, serve dinner at the shelter, and play games with kids who were less fortunate and missed out on such childhood memories, we were broadening our perspective of our community and seeing that every little bit that we were giving back was just the beginning to helping each other out. For my 100 hours, I did all these tasks and more in order to give back and strengthen our community. Junior year, or the 6th and 7th circles of hell, are heresy and violence. This brought on the most difficult class, in my opinion, political philosophy. Miss Reed told us how she always looked forward to this class because this was her area of expertise. Studying the earliest Greek philosophers, Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle, all the way to the modern scientists of Freud, Pavlov, and Jung. We discussed matters of free will versus fate, existentialism, and the mind. Epistemology, metaphysics, and aesthetics tested our minds and reason as our Socratic circles tried to find logic behind the heresy and violence we began to study. Our midterm in this course was a formal report on a philosopher, comprehensive in their schooling, works, and their views on the world. Mine was the well-known Asian philosopher Confucius. Throughout the semester, we read the fine works of Sophie's World, Machiavelli's The Prince, and the haunting and influential George Orwell work, 1984. Our mind-bending and self-doubting course came to a close with our final, which was a philosophical debate. Partners were picked and thought-provoking topics were assigned, and our speaking knowledge from the year before made a guest appearance for this project. My partner was Wally Harmon, who you saw present today, and we were set to debate whether the question of spread of democracy through violence was ethical or not. I argued in support of revolution and its historical effects in spreading democratic values. Now enter second semester, walk into your third period class, and you only see a third of your Civitas peers. There is no second semester class in Civitas, only 5 semester meetings in which Ms. Reed made sure we were on track in being assigned and committing to our junior internship. In our meetings, we explored our interests and decided what we would set ourselves in order to give back appropriately. I expressed my interest in the election of this year, and I found myself working hands-on in the Elizabeth Emkin for U.S. Senate campaign. I worked under my mentor, Mr. Mark Stangl, who was the former communications director of the California Republican headquarters and Ms. Emkin's campaign director. These tasks included contacting every major media outlet, from radio, television, and publications out in California, finding all news and talk radio stations in the 32 cities Ms. Emkin was planning to visit in a city-to-city tour, and organizing volunteers in a calling center in the neighboring suite in Rancho Cordova. And senior year, the 8th and 9th circles of hell are fraud and treachery. Senior year, we've all made it. A year of minimal work, right? College and scholarship applications, and to us Civitas students, our senior projects. What we have worked 3 years for, intern 75 hours our summer to, and what will define our Civitas career. This year was an election year, which meant lots of opportunity for projects. I was one of several students who centered their project on the election, and I organized and presented a forum for the first of our few in the class, and open to Rio Americano's student and teacher population on the California Ballot Initiatives 30, 32, and 35. This year's election was the most anticipated in decades, and I thought back to the 2008 election. More young voters had registered and gotten out to make the most important decision in our country. I was inspired to see that our youth was getting out there and voicing their opinions, but I was also disheartened to learn that they were only getting out there to vote for a president and not on the ballot initiatives that affected their states and communities. And I feel our student population needed to be informed as we entered the polls on the mock election that followed a few weeks after here at the school. Sacramento's youth, as long as a part of the California youth, was going to make decisions on November 6th that affected everything down to school budgets and other important matters to us. In order to fully benefit us all, the entire population, but especially the youth, needed to be educated and properly informed. This was the purpose of my project, to ensure teachers, eligible seniors, and other students were properly informed. And for each proposition, I had 1 to 2 speakers to represent each side of the argument. For Proposition 30, I had Craig Cornett, the fiscal advisor for Senator Darrell Steinberg, an actual writer of the legislation for the proposition, who was in favor, and Cindy Stangl, a small business owner and mother of a current CSU student and a future one, who was speaking against it. For Proposition 32, I had 2 Civitas students from the program who were active in extracurricular speaking activities, Megan McKenna in favor and Brooke Carroll in opposition. For Proposition 35, I only had 1 speaker due to the opposition argument and its uncertainty. who was Anthony Williams and a campaign associate for Yes, I'm 35. The forum was a 1-hour-long forum repeated 4 times that day for the first 4 periods in the bell schedule. Each hour allowed time for my opening regards, the speakers to defend their points, and the audience to ask questions at the end. By the end of 4th period, I was satisfied with my completed project, and so was the advisor, Ms. Reed. So what was the question? What is Civitas? Of course. Any outsider can tell you the surface details, that it's a 4-year elective course in which students take college-level courses pertaining to politics and completing 100 hours of community service in order to become civic-minded and informed citizens of tomorrow. But only those of the graduating class of each year can tell you what it really means. Of course, we all perceive it differently, but it affects us all in the same way. This is how I have taken in and used Civitas. My knowledge of all political systems has expanded as answering the question of the difference between socialism and communism now comes easily to mind. My admiration for small and local efforts has bloomed, and I know that with enough work, they can become known across the state, nation, and world. My speech skills, hopefully, have developed further from the fierce little freshman yelling at her peer about the prisons. My assessment of domestic and foreign policy has gone beyond the small sphere of thinking I had prior to sophomore year. My personal philosophy has been established in practice since 2011. My practice in attending appointments, interviews, and participation in email correspondence has broken in and is applicable in the real world in virtually any field. I look back at my high school experience, and I know it would be drastically different and not for the better had I not joined Civitas. Over the years, I've cursed myself and the class currently torturing me, but I now realize there is not a single second I would take back. Over the years, I've cried, screamed, and exalted, all in the name of Civitas. And I can hope that for years after me, there are students who experience the same kind of hell, because it is the best time I've ever had.
She's open for questions. The allegory writer.
Did you find that your presentations to the classes triggered some questions and comments from the students on the propositions?
Oh, yes, that was actually, that was good, because I thought in informing them, it should inspire questions to further clarify their points. My mother, Stangl, was actually the speaker in opposition of 30, and she had some tough questions thrown at her, so.
Yeah, she really did. What was good about Tessa's presentations, too, is that she put those poor speakers through four periods. When you heard the other ones, they were 2 periods long, so they were 2 hours long, and we crammed as many kids in as we possibly could. So we've got about 300 kids in each of those sessions. Tess got more than anybody else because she had a couple hundred every period, so she had probably 700 or 800 kids actually hear those propositions. We had a lot of students attend. So
there were a lot of very good questions.
Yeah, yeah. We really had a lot of students participate in that one. And the one that was where we got no opposition was the sex trafficking bill. So that, of course, there wasn't.
They wanted to know a lot about that.
What did you enjoy most about working on campaigns and on initiatives?
I think what I enjoyed most was just being a part of it. I've always held an interest in politics. I grew up in a household where my mother and father insisted we be educated and aware of what was going on, which, I mean, now I realize is maybe the best tool I've ever had. And being a part of it, seeing what was going on from the campaign perspective was really special. I mean, I was able to research topics in which Ms. Enkin's opponent, Senator Dianne Feinstein, her opinions on topics and what varied. So that was a lot of fun, and the propositions was good too. Honestly, prior to my project, I didn't know a lot, so it made me look into them and learn about them so I could properly, speak one way or another about them.
Any other questions? Tess, you're done.